Welcome. My name is Eric. I'm the Swedish Consulate General in New York. And I'm also a convinced feminist. Being a feminist for me is always wearing your gender equality glasses on. It's realizing that the world would be a better place if we had more of equal opportunities, and also try every day to see that women's rights are human rights and human rights are women's rights. I start there because what we are celebrating today, and being Swedish, is extremely fun to be able to celebrate Pippi Longstocking. Because Pippi Longstocking for me is one of these feminist icons that for generations of kids around the globe actually have made them been able to take that extra step, or to dare to do something, or to see that even if you're a young girl or a woman, you actually have the right to take place in society. When Pippi Longstocking first was written, it was sent into a publisher in Sweden, one of the biggest ones. I shouldn't single them out. But they said, no, this is too crazy. We can't publish her. I think they're a little bit sorry today. But when it came out, 1945, it was immediately a success, which for me today is a little bit surprising, because Pippi is in so many ways very revolutionary. But one of the critics wrote, this is the children's books of the century. A revolution in nursery, was someone else that said. Our first Swedish professor in education wasn't so happy though. There were critical voices as well. He said that Pippi, an unpleasant thing, scratched at one's soul. And she acts like she's mentally ill. So it was a debate back then, but mostly the consumers loved Pippi in Sweden from the beginning. We wouldn't be able to make the celebration of Pippi Longstocking 80 years without help from partners, and I'd like to thank some of them. Aviva will fill in with the people that I might miss. But first, I would like to especially thank you to Lena Kaplan, Anki Leeds, Annika Kahn, Barbro Nilsson Denere, Camilla Falk Schepper, Kristina Rappaport, Kristina Stout, Inge Vedin, Kina Andersson, Lisa Östberg, Madeleine Ekholm, Marianne Thorsén, and Monica Heimbold from the Swedish women's organization Svea. I'm thanking you because you are helping us. Together with the Penguin Random House, you have gathered money, so we actually, some of the librarians here will be able to hand out at least 8,500 books to kids around Manhattan. Svea, Svea was founded 52 years ago. I think it was Lena that was the founder. A group of Swedish women in New York that has meant so much for spreading the Swedish brand, Swedish culture. I don't know if you're a feminist, but I hope you are. You are a feminist icons yourself also in the work I've been doing here for decades. Thank you so much. I would also, of course, like to thank New York Public Library and especially the librarians that are here today. There are some professions that doesn't really get the thanks that they should get. Librarians are among them. So you are working together with your colleagues in more than 100 different libraries around Manhattan. You are among the people that help kids on the right track. You open the eyes for kids for reading their first book. Or you open the doors for a migrant kid coming in, not being part of the society here. And for that, I'm actually, as a human being, quite deeply thankful for you doing. We need police and others as well. That's fine. The police wasn't happy with that. We need police and others as well. But of course, what you are doing in the long term for societies is actually also building a more secure city. I would like to thank New York Parks and Swedish Cottage. You will see a little bit of them later, for their cooperation with you. I would like to thank Pan America, standing up for free speech and co-organizing this with us. Standing up for free speech today, I would say has never been more important than actually when we speak. Last but not least, for me, Pippi Longstocking is a gold mine of quotes. One of my favorites is, "It is best for small children to have an organized life, especially if they can organize it themselves." Pippi Longstocking and Astrid Lindgren, the great Swedish author, has been a symbol for and of children's rights for decades. A quote like that sends the message to us all that we remember our own childhood, but it also says to us, you should believe in yourself. Stand up for yourself and stand up for others. And last but not least, I will end where I started, bringing so much courage to young girls and to young women, being the feminist icon. And when you read this now 80 years old story, you see a quite modern message concerning a young girl living on her own, standing up against stupid rules and oppression, but also standing up for the weaker human being living next to her. So thank you for joining. I was too long, Aviva. Sorry, but I was just supposed to say welcome and thank you, and have a nice afternoon.
Thank you, Eric. That was great. I'll add some thanks as well. My name is Aviva Newman. I'm the head of culture and public affairs at the consulate. We are so excited to be working on Pippi Longstocking events with you all throughout 2025. It's been a remarkable joint effort made, as Eric said, PEN America, the Swedish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Astrid Lindgren Foundation, the Astrid Lindgren Company, the City Parks Foundation, the Swedish Cottage that we will see later, and as Eric mentioned, Svea, the women's group. Collaborating with the New York Public Library is both significant and an honor. We really applaud you all for champion education, freedom of speech, and it acts as a safe haven for millions of people. After this discussion, we will have a snippet of the Swedish Cottage marionette puppet theater that will be showing us a small short of their new play. We would also like to thank Bon Bon, the Swedish candy company that you probably know of. That's what gets an applaud. They'll be serving treats. And I would like to thank our panel coming up now. I would like to welcome moderator Leonard Marcus, children's book historian and critic. Jonathan Friedman, Managing Director of the U.S. Free Expression and Education at PEN America. Laurie Halse Anderson, author, 2023 Laureate of the Astrid Lindgren Memorial Award, an advocate for freedom of speech and expression. Johan Palmberg, great-grandson of Astrid Lindgren herself, member of the Astrid Lindgren Memorial Award jury and representative of the company. And Jamia Wilson, American writer, commentator, and feminist activist. Welcome, please.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Cheeky, outspoken, self-propelled 9-year-old Pippi Longstocking turns 80 this year, and time on the whole has treated her well. When Pippi the book first appeared in print in Sweden in November of 1945, its child heroine was widely hailed as a joyful post-war figure of liberation. Here was a life-affirming antidote to the terror and destruction humankind had just endured. And coming as it did from a young author already known for her tartly satirical tendencies, here too was a subtle rebuke to the generation then in power. If the grown-ups could get things that wrong, Astrid Lindgren seemed to be telling the world, perhaps it was time for the children to have a turn at being in charge, at the very least in matters where their own well-being was concerned. In Sweden, Lindgren's second book for young readers was an instant success, its popularity amplified by frequent radio readings and a children's theater production that became an annual occasion. A year after publication, a brief backlash, which we just heard about, arose when a respected Swedish educator argued that saucy Pippi epitomized not so much a liberated child as an emotionally unstable one, and as such set a bad example for others. By then, however, the cat was out of the bag, and Pippi Longstocking, with its buoyant echoes of Alice in Wonderland, had more than proven its worth as a go-to choice for school-aged children in search of a good book to read for their own pleasure. 80 or so foreign language translations of Pippi have gone out into the world, starting with the 1949 German edition and the American one of 1 year later. In the US, Pippi landed well at the Viking Press, where pathfinding Juvenile's editor May Massey had already taken a flyer on Germany's irreverent Emil and the Detectives by Erich Kästner. Not every translation was equally faithful to the original. In France, for instance, concerned that rigorously logical French children would refuse to believe that even the strongest girl in the world could lift a horse, prompted a translator there to downsize the horse to a pony. Amusing, certainly, but putting words in an author's mouth can also verge on or actually become an act of censorship, a fate that has befallen Pippi to varying degrees over the years, from Norway to Iran, and even, some have said, in Sweden. Astrid Lindgren went on to enjoy a long and productive literary life, and to become a living legend while remaining true to type as an irascible, thought-provoking gadfly. Whatever the topic, she was bound to have something surprising and pertinent to say. By way of explaining her devotion to children as an audience, for example, she once remarked that one has only to observe the young, quote, to see what the Lord was really thinking when he made people, that they should be good and laugh at life. Extending the contrast between children and grown-ups, she asked, why can't we hold on to the ability to see earth and grass and pattering rain and starry skies as blessings all our lives? Over the years, Lindgren became a fierce advocate for children's rights. As such, the creator of Pippi Longstocking found herself thinking more often in pragmatic terms about the actual difficulties faced by any child compelled to live alone in a not always hospitable society and world. The new child psychology had value for her, but only within limits. No treatment in the world, she wrote, can take the place of the love that a child didn't get before he was 10. And still more poignantly, children can't be alone in the world. They have to be with someone. So, with that, I turn to our panel here, and I thought we would start by thinking about Pippi Longstocking as a book from a child's point of view. And so, Johan, I'd like to start with you as Astrid Lindgren's great-grandson. And would you tell us a little bit about how you first became aware of Pippi Longstocking and what it meant to be descended from one of Sweden's most revered writers? For example, in school were your papers graded on a higher curve? Take it away.
Yeah, I feel like my Swedish teachers had a good eye for me from the beginning because they thought I had that magical blood in me, which was good. It helped me a lot. And I don't know of a specific time when I was made aware of Pippi. She was, she was like the rain or the wind or something. She was always there. But I do remember I would listen constantly to Astrid's own readings of the Pippi books. So I've been told that you could always hear me coming because I would walk around with a little cassette tape player. And so I was sort of shepherded by Astrid's voice wherever I went.
So, Laurie, tell us about your memories of Pippi Longstocking growing up, because I think she meant quite a bit to you.
Oh my gosh, yes. I actually had a hard time learning how to read. So and then when I figured it out, thanks to the public school teachers in Syracuse, New York, when I finally figured it out, it was just like this huge treasure cave had been opened to me. And I read Pippi just a little bit before I read Little House on the Prairie. And I see some interesting common threads between the characters, but Pippi picked up a horse. Now, I was a strong kid, and I'm not a small one. And my mother had this notion of what it was to be a female that was very different than what I felt myself to be. And this character picked up a horse, not a pony. And that changed me. And just the rest of the story and the absolute bizarreness and the joyfulness of that character, who even like when I loved how she's taking on the bullies and she's doing it very cheerfully, which is a good message for all of us. And she returns again to kindness as soon as she dispatches them. And it left a really lovely mark inside my heart. It was a good, it helped me find my path.
And you told me once that there was one other female heroine that you loved as a child. Who was that?
Wonder Woman. My mother, I had a wonderful, full-size Wonder Woman poster in my closet door. Had to be inside the closet because Mom wasn't thrilled. And I read recently that Superman had come to Sweden, I believe, shortly before Astrid began to write Pippi. And so maybe there's definitely a superhero, I think.
I think she actually did a sketch of Superman in in one of the original manuscripts
That's
or
right.
something.
That's right. So yeah, it's and can you think of another superhero who is a child? I think Pippi's in her own canon. She's it.
Actually, that
brilliant.
makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I think that's
Absolutely
true.
brilliant.
Yeah. So Jamia, you were in an unusual part of the world to be reading Pippi Longstocking. Where were you when you first discovered this book?
So I'm so excited to be with you and celebrating Pippi together. I am American and I'm from South Carolina, and my parents moved to Saudi Arabia when I was a little short of 6 years old, and I had to figure out how to make friends with kids who spoke 50 different languages at my school, who were from all over the world in this international school. And so I spent a lot of my time in the library or trying to watch TV and find, and we had 2 channels then in Saudi, only one of them was in English, to find ways that we could talk together, and a lot of that was through culture. So that was one of the ways I found Pippi, because I found that she was not so much a censored figure because she was a child superhero. I agree, she's a child superhero. But also being able to get those books in past censors and bring them in was a great way to start talking to people. And one day, when I was about 7 or 8 years old, we had new neighbors who were from Stockholm, who moved into our apartment building, and it was so wonderful to be able to talk to them about Pippi, because I didn't speak Swedish and they were learning English, and we were all together, and I had these Pippi books. And so I think that I see her as someone who brings people together. And then I also, as you can see, like to wear my hair in braids. So I loved her for that too, because I was made fun of for having different hair as a child. And I remember telling people, well, I have hair like Pippi's hair, even though it's not red, and Pippi's cool. So it was nice to have her there and to sort of say, it's okay that I'm different from everybody else.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So Laurie, when you were 13, you went as a student abroad to Denmark, I think. Right?
16.
16.
16, yeah.
Okay.
I was. That's how I escaped American high school. I was an American Field Service foreign exchange student. So I lived on a pig farm in Denmark for 13 months, the way you do. Oh, jeg kan godt tale dansk. But I don't think there's anybody who wants to hear it. And I think that it came at a kind of a challenging time in my life. My American family was going through some hard things, and the family that I lived with in Denmark was extraordinary. I was, I'm still very close to them, and they changed my life. And it opened my mind, my heart to Scandinavian cultures and the expressions of childhood and adolescence in Scandinavia, which are very, very different from the United States. And I think the fact that I've written about sexual violence in a frank way has everything to do with having been in Denmark, and especially the time I was there in 1978, 1979. And it was, I don't think I could have written my books without having been a part in there. So that
that's
helped.
just what I was wondering. Yeah, that's really fascinating. Yeah. I'd like to sort of look at this now from another angle and think about Pippi from more of an adult perspective. And I mentioned that the Pippi has been published in 80 or more languages. And so, Jonathan, you're very interested in how books travel from culture to culture. Many don't, but some do. And you've been interested in what those that do travel and are accepted by a wide range of people have in common. Would you like to say a little bit about that?
I'd love to. Well, thank you for having me from PEN America, where I think a lot about issues of international literature and cross-cultural understanding, and of course, censorship, which is just makes this story so fascinating that we were sharing. When Leonard asked me, like, did I read Pippi Longstocking? I mean, not only did I not read that much as a kid, because I was a real book skimmer, I saw my purpose in the library to kind of like pick up as many books and learn a little bit about them so that if it came up some other time in life, I might be able to know something about that topic. And it's interesting because, you know, Pippi, I know exactly who she is. I know so much about her. I can't remember how I acquired it. So she's just sort of in the air of my childhood. A friend of mine, I asked, you know, what her memory is, and she said, well, as a redhead, that was like the best costume for Halloween, and that's what they gave her. And but you know, it's like I've always been fascinated from a young age with the world and cross-cultural difference. That's something that's always just been very interesting for me. And I grew up in Canada, where so much of our culture was influenced and still is by the United States. And yet, you have, you know, characters like Pippi that sort of say there's something more to the world. There's something more to people that come from other places that you might be interested to travel to learn about, to know something about their histories. And I've always been intrigued, you know, when thinking about Pippi, this sort of like echelon of global characters that, you know, we can all sort of think about today. Like if you know, who is in that group? Like Sherlock Holmes is up there, right? Who else, you know? And I'm struggle to think of any other young women, young girls who are powerful, powerful in their own right, who are rebellious, who are opinionated. And, you know, when we think a lot about standing up to, I think what was said earlier, stupid oppression, boy, do we all need a lot of that right now. So I think there is something really incredible about being able to pluck this character from history and see how she and other characters, you know, still sort of hit on a universal message, a universal theme that, you know, can transcend, as you said, like all kinds of difference.
Yeah. So we have two writers for young people here, and so Laurie and Jamia, I'd like to ask you to think about Pippi Longstocking as piece of writing and what your current perspective, so from maybe a craft point of view or otherwise, would be as compared to what you remember of it as a child. How does it stand up for you? And to make it even more interesting, how would it be published today, do you think?
That's a good question. Yes, so I absolutely would hope that everyone would be racing to publish Pippi right now because we need her. I am excited about this question because so I work on both sides of the desk. I am an executive editor for adult nonfiction in my day job, but in my past imprint, I did do children's and adult, but then I'm also a writer of mostly children's books, or I like to say books for the next generation, for all ages. And I have done a lot of nonfiction work because I've been really sort of concerning myself with the books I needed at the time and feeling like the books that emerge from my spirit that call for me, sort of like ancestral ghosts or something that need to come because of the times that we're in and what they are. But then my agent was talking to me about how she said, you know, you have a really big imagination, and have you ever thought about fiction? So I've been thinking a lot about what Pippi means right now in those conversations around, we have a lot going on in the nonfiction of our lives right now, worldwide. And there are things that fiction can do to penetrate the imagination, expand, make us more expansive, more visionary, to play with time in different ways. And when she first said it, you know, non-Pippi inspired part of me that was taking in the doubts and the fears and the misogyny of life thought, oh, I can't possibly do that. I don't have the bona fides in fiction to do that. Said no, but then I started to have these vivid dreams and just starting to write them down and ideas and things that have come to me thinking, oh, I actually feel that maybe Pippi and the other fiction, like the Phantom Toll Booth has been coming to mind for me as well. These other works that made me think past what is in front of me, which is actually the visionary leadership of the child, which is, oh, you tell me this is just the way it is because I inherited it, and I know another world is possible. So I'm really thinking about that right now for me, and see, now I'm like, oh, am I holding myself accountable by saying this in front of a lot of people? To try my hand at probably writing some bad fiction until I write some good fiction. Because I'm feeling like perhaps what I'm really needing to concern myself with is not what is right in front of me. It has to be like some of the ancestors who've really inspired me, like Octavia Butler, to imagine the future. Now, I don't want to be as prophetic as she was, because she thought, she told us we were going to come where we are right now. But I have really been thinking about that now is a time, as someone who's edited nonfiction for a long time, that I want to do fiction in my own writing life. And I'm also starting to open my list up more to editing fiction. And I think we need it to expand ourselves.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so Laurie.
Wow, that's the best answer I think I've ever heard to any question. It's interesting because I've been thinking a lot about, I need to write another YA. And, thanks. And it just doesn't, and I've been struggling. And what I had hit upon a couple of years ago, right around the time I was graced with this incredible award, was I needed to look at myth. Because I think that some of the things I still want to say about teenagers have when you get to a certain point in your life, you're fed up with your day-to-day realism. And so I thought if I approach it from a mythological perspective, that would open some things up, which is why kids love fantasy so much, for the record, because myth speaks to us in a deep place that we can't even understand, but we can just feel it. And I think Pippi's the same thing. When you look at the book, like, there's no explanation about, oh, she's got magical powers or anything. It's just assumed that this kid, this is how she is. And in truth, she's carrying within her the powers and strengths of all children. So I find that just kind of earth-shaking. It's also really cool for me, and part of understanding the impact of this book, but also from the writing perspective. This was a book that she told to your grandmother. This was a story she told to her daughter, her child. And if you spend any time around small kids, that's the most powerful thing that we can give them, either spoken or in paper or on a tablet, is to share stories with them. So that's, for me, that's a sacred space. So those are the thoughts that I find myself being chased. I'm not sure if Pippi would be published today. I'm not sure. I actually think that it might come back if it got in the hands of a young associate editor who saw the power in it. They would want it, and they might take it to the meeting. And I could see like the people who are kind of have the money people would say, no, I don't know, it doesn't look very commercial to me, But it just shows the power of an incredible story that it has, that's touching all of it. Like, I can't believe you read it in Saudi Arabia. That's so wonderful. So yeah.
It is, yeah.
Be more Pippi.
So I have a couple questions for Johan. First is, we mostly think of, or many people do, Astrid Lindgren as the author of this one book, but she spent a very long life writing lots of books. I wonder if you would just give us a little bit of a glimpse of the overview of her writing life.
Ooh, okay. Well, she wrote 3 Pippi books, and that was sort of as you said, the kickstart of her career. I think the book that is most often talked about in Sweden, at least, as her really sort of masterpiece, is a book called The Brothers Lionheart, which you might be aware of, about yeah, it's a book about death and about standing up to oppression and about the love between two brothers. It's an amazing book, I think. She did a couple of others. It's a fantasy story. She did a couple of other fantasy stories. So there's one called Me or My Son, also about. She has a lot of young, lonely boys and a lot of strong girls. So Mio is also about a young boy who's sort of travels to a fantasy land. And one of my favorites is Ronja the Robber's Daughter, which is this medieval sort of Romeo and Juliet story about two rivaling band of bandits in the woods of Sweden, and the children of these two clans becoming friends and sort of standing up to the legacy of their parents and their parents' hatred. So yeah, and there's a lot she wrote. She wrote a lot of really funny books and a lot of great sort of realism for young children. Yeah.
And the other thing I want to ask is, there's no doubt that Pippi, as a character, is a symbol of Swedish culture, right? What does she symbolize?
Oof. Well, yeah, you know, she's been around for a long time, for 80 years now, and she's almost become, you know, so abstracted that she just symbolizes Sweden in some way. So if you go to a soccer match and the Swedish national team is playing, the fans will have a Pippi wig, or maybe a Viking helmet with a built-in Pippi wig. So you know, she symbolizes a lot of different things to different people, but I think in the way that she symbolizes Sweden, she symbolizes what Swedes would most like people to think about Swedes. So this sort of anti-authoritarianism, I guess, and this sort of free thinking and free spirit and sort of playfulness is how Swedes sometimes like to look at themselves. It's not necessarily true, but it's. I think that's why she's such a strong cultural icon there. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I mentioned that in a way funny alteration of the text in the French edition, and in 2014, when Pippi television show was from the 60s was re-aired, there were some changes made to it in line with what might be called political correctness or different understanding of stereotypes, and from what I have read, it caused kind of an uproar in Sweden, didn't it? And there were some people who didn't want to change a thing about it, and so it was almost as if it was being treated as a sacred text by some people. And that, if anybody wants to comment on that, that in itself I think is quite interesting. But I also wonder what everyone here on the panel thinks about when it's okay to change a classic and when it isn't, and you know, what the thinking behind that would be, either way. Jonathan, do you want to say something about that part of it?
I think it's really, I think we all pause on it because it's such a profound question, you know, and we know, you know, as I was thinking about so many historic examples of popular books, every single one of them I hesitate to raise because I know they're so problematic, you know? When I mentioned flipping through books, I was flipping through Tintin. My kids don't flip through Tintin. I probably wouldn't give them Tintin, right? Would I want Tintin to be updated and changed and contemporary, or do I think it's important that Tintin be as he was created for his time? And I think one thing that is really hard with this is, it's one thing when the author is alive, it's another when it's the author's family, and it's a third when it's, you know, whatever company now owns those books, and you know, and as sort of like has no, can revise books, even classics, with no guardrails whatsoever. And so I know this has been an issue with another problematic person, Roald Dahl, in all of his books, and just how broadly his books, a set of his books, was in the past few years published with, a huge amount of changes. So not just a word here or there, and some like really changing the meaning of words. And on the one hand, I think, is that necessarily a problem? It's not illegal to do this. I think one thing we want to make sure is that anyone doing that is being really clear. Like, I think about the contemporary adaptation of Juliet, which is now on Broadway. Maybe it's because I'm a Heartstopper fan, I don't know, but it's on my mind. And, obviously nobody would say, like, you can't do that with a Shakespeare play. It must be exactly how it was, and we should never adapt. That's absurd. We adapt things all the time, right? But the key is, I think, to emphasize the adaptation and to be just sort of careful with it. I think at the same time as we know there is pressure right now to change a lot of these classics, we are also living through a moment right now where we are watching the very words that once were perfectly acceptable become targeted for censorship and abolition by the federal government. And they haven't come after books, they haven't come after television shows in terms of rewriting them yet. They've come after books a lot, but just in terms of rewriting them. But it is the logical, they're not listening. I know they're not listening. Pippi Longstocking, but the logical next step in this is that's where that goes, right? That, that we might not have that book in school unless you change those words. We might not allow that work to be shown in a certain way unless we change those words. And there's this deliberate effort right now, which I think is different from trying to reckon with like the cultural legacies and challenges of some of these older books, but they're sort of like different sides of the same coin. And so I'm always, as a person who does free expression work, I'm always wary of the rationales that people offer for why we can't deal with something that was produced in the past, why we seem to think that we have lost sometimes the tools to understand that something might be problematic, but maybe that's important to understand, maybe that's itself a lesson, maybe that's interesting, but so much right now it just feels like, well, that might be problematic or controversial, well, let's just put it back in the closet and let's not deal with it. And I think that attitude is spreading, this seems to be just one symptom of it.
So thank you for what you're saying, because one of the things that has really come to me, and it's something I'm very passionate about, is I believe that the conversation should really be about media literacy and how are we making sure that young people are getting access to media literacy in schools and that libraries are getting funded. Thank you to the amazing librarians that are here. I love you. And that we are giving young people the tools to make the critical decisions they need to make and understand. Every children's book I loved as a child, because my mom said I was born 35, was always a book where I felt that the protagonist or the author understood that I was innately intelligent and could make my own deductions. And any book that was given to me in which they were talking down in a condescending tone, which is why I love Pippi, because she was always like, oh, you talk down to me? No, let me one up. Really, was not a book I concerned myself with. And so I think a lot about that when I write to young people. I get letters from parents all the time saying, oh, that was too advanced. People who, and I say, oh, I write up on purpose because my inner child was the inner child who was born 35 and who understands that if there's something adults don't want me to know about, it's something I pretty much really need to know about. And so the media literacy for me is really important so that we can teach young people to engage with nuance and context and trust them and their intellects to make the right decisions. So for example, I did become familiar with some of the controversy around Pippi and the original story and the father's original name and what that meant. But because I speak other languages, which I also really advocate for Americans to do, I know that the meaning of the word black in a Latin French language in a different culture has a different meaning to the connotation of the U.S. specific history in which I do not like to use those words or to have children have to say them in school. And I think that instead of shielding children from the history, we should let them understand and know about that and know how to move into these contexts so they can understand cultural competency to move within the world with people who are not like them. And so I guess I would just like to say that, and I can speak from one example of my own, which is when I was at Feminist Press, which I loved, we had the yellow wallpaper, and I was then also teaching undergraduate gender studies at John Jay, and I had some students say, I'm really shocked you would teach this text because the writer has been found to be a white supremacist. And I said, that's all the more reason I want new front and back matter for this book, to put it in the context of the time for you to understand this and why a person could be espousing gender justice and leaving out racial justice and why we're somewhere else now. And then also in my own experience, the French version of my first children's book, Young, Gifted, and Black, does not have that title. And the title is I Have a Dream, and it was not my decision. And I learned later, because I was really asking, how did we get to that? Oh, and it's also in English, so I don't understand why why that title's in English when the rest of the book is in French. But then I had some people explain to me about sort of the experience of Martin Luther King and what he means to people in France as some people's first entryway into the conversation. And so it was very interesting to me that I had Black French friends who were saying, oh, I can't believe you let that be your title in France. But then I had other people saying this is the way that some parents would have this book in their home because others in the communitarian values that we've learned in our culture and history would think that the book was keeping people separate. And so I put that out there to say that, you know, in future printings, I want it to have Black in the title, but it was a really good lesson for me to have to engage with this myself and to say, what does it mean to actually realize that maybe there's not one right or wrong answer for how we deal with these things. I just think that the conflict must generatively be confronted. And if we do that, then we can move forward.
I just have one quick thing to add, and please correct me if I have this wrong. I believe that in her lifetime, Astrid herself was the one who said to change some of the words that we find very offensive. I mean, some people have always found them offensive, and now the rest of us are slowly learning. So that kind of falls under what you said about the living person themselves going, oh, I've learned more, let's change this, which is great. My only struggle with classics is that when it comes to the book buying public, they tend to stay a generation behind the books that are being published today. And I would love to see for the libraries in the United States, first of all, you know, just let's all celebrate Pippi and Astrid's work, especially the Brothers Lionheart. Wow, we have a lot to learn from that one. Oh boy. But also there are so many books that are being created today that I feel have characters that are the spiritual grandchildren of Pippi. Authors like Meg Medina and Jackie Woodson and Renee Watson and Kelly Yang and Linda Sue Park. I mean, just on and on and on. And so I would love to see in libraries at least a pairing of the classic, especially the classic that kind of lifted the genre and lifted all of our hearts. And if you like this book, look at these ones. Because one of the things that the censorship is doing in this country is it's destroying the careers of our rising generation of people who are creating books for children. And we have to support especially those young authors and illustrators with every fiber of our beings if we are to continue to have an amazing collection of children's literature in America.
Meg Medina, who you just mentioned, is the author of, among other books, one called Yaqui Delgado Wants to Kick Your Ass.
Yes.
It could be an echo of Pippi there.
Yeah, absolutely.
So as I understand it, that situation I mentioned a few moments ago with the rebroadcast of the 60s TV adaptation in 2014 was, there were two solutions, right? The one applied to the book and the one applied to the TV show itself. And I remember what they're. Do you also? I'd like to hear you tell everyone.
No,
if you do. So what I recall is that the problem was Pippi's father was referred to as King of the Negroes, and then people, of course, found that offensive. So he became, I think, King of the South Seas on the TV show. And then also she tried to look Chinese by squinting her eyes, and they took that out of the TV show. But when they made the change in the new edition of the book, they included a note at the back explaining why they did it and how what had been done in the past was part of history too, which I thought was really a wonderful way of approaching it, because, I mean, books start in a certain period of history, they move on through history, and then they come to us eventually. And all of that is relevant, you know, and none of it should be forgotten or erased. But on the TV show, they just made the change because, you know, it was like flying by for the viewer. There's no time to explain. So I thought that was a very sensible two-pronged approach. I don't know where this fits in, but I want to mention the girl with the dragon tattoo. Who would like to talk about that? That's Pippi a little bit older, isn't it?
Yeah, well, that's what the author said anyway. That was his thought experiment. Yeah.
If you disagree, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's one way of interpreting her. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So, so since we do have so many librarians here, Jonathan has interesting news about a film which is about to come out.
Oh, sure. Well, first of all, I mean, librarians, thank you. That's always where I begin when I talk to any librarians, because librarians have been not only incredible, but one of the true delights, actually, of starting to fight book banning across the U.S. was I actually got to start meeting librarians, and they've taught me a tremendous amount. Not only, you know, it was very interesting what you said a minute ago, Laurie, about children and the book buying public being a generation behind, because as a parent, that's where I was. And now I am not. And it's because I met so many librarians, and 5 years ago, I wouldn't have known most of those authors and wouldn't have thought it was my responsibility as a parent to bring those authors to my kids. And that's something that's changed significantly. But there is a new film coming out that was just premiered at Sundance called The Librarians. And I really just want to, I have to give this film an enormous shout out because it's actually foregrounds librarians in the story of the fight against book banning and the fight for intellectual freedom. And the film itself is incredible. The librarians in it are incredible. But also, I do hope that this is the film that can reach a mass public with understanding that this whole thing has never really been about really that one book in your kid's classroom. And there's been a tremendous amount of just outrageous and unfair demonization of librarians that no one in any profession should have to live with. And the notion that we've seen across the country to criminalize librarians, you know, I hope that the rising generation will still have the language and vocabulary to call that Orwellian. And I worry sometimes about whether they will get that. But just this new film called The Librarians is going to be premiering later this year, and just really encourage everyone to look it up, check it out. It's an incredible telling of this just horrible moment. But the librarians in it, and librarians around the country, even those whose stories aren't featured, it takes so much bravery. I mean, let's bring it back to Pippi, okay? Full circle. I cannot believe the bravery that has been expected and required of so many librarians around the country, even here in New York and in New Jersey and, like, you know, in the Bronx and other places, to stand up for people's rights. You wouldn't think it was such a radical act to say this child who should not have the right to take away to read that book taken away. And what librarians have taught me, and what is so poorly understood right now in the public, is that, you know, in a lot of places, the books that are being challenged the most, the librarians are standing up for them because they know how popular the books are. You know, one librarian said to me, I couldn't let them ban that book. It's the most popular book in circulation. And this whole idea that librarians are trying to like change people's minds and brainwash the public and kids and all that. I mean, it's ridiculous because every librarian actually believes in circulation, a concept that is so not well understood, but is so fundamental to the profession, which is to say putting books that people want to read and are being taken out. So there's a disconnect here where the movement to censor is so clearly not only about taking away books, but taking away the best books. And they're taking away the best books that have just gotten there so much of the time. And fear is such a big part of this. And, you know, it's fear of what, you know, young people who might think differently about the world might represent.
Oh, great. Thank you. Yeah. So we just have a couple more minutes before it's time for you guys to ask questions. So start thinking what you might want to ask everyone. But before we do that, I do want to hear a little bit about the Astrid Lindgren Memorial Award. And Johan, perhaps you could tell us how it was founded and what it's all about, and Laurie, as one of the winners, what it has meant to your life as a writer and otherwise.
Yeah, of course. It was founded by the Swedish government in 2002 when Astrid died as a way to honor her memory. And the point of it is to award and sort of give recognition to authors, illustrators, and also organizations that sort of work in her spirit or carries on her legacy in some way. It's an international award. It's given for the full body of work. Yeah, and I think it's still the second biggest literary award in terms of prize money, which we're proud of. It's only that damn Nobel Prize that's ahead of us. And to me, it's such an honor to be in that jury and to get to read so many great books from all around the world that I would not have been able to get my hands on otherwise. And to read fantastic authors like Jacqueline and Laurie. Yeah.
Thank you. So Laurie, what did it mean to you to win this prize?
It might have, it's a little dramatic to say saved my life, but it might have saved my soul, or maybe it did. When I got the phone call, which was just about 2 years ago this week, I think, I was deeply depressed. Everything that I had worked for in my career in terms of trying to be a writer, but also creating books and being part of a community that is creating books that open up conversations that all of our people need to have. Within families, within communities, within schools, and to have it it was going up, and it still is, it's going up in flames all around us. And I just was despairing and was pretty broken, and I'm still a little broken, but I can almost pick up a pony now. And that award, and especially the way that the jury chooses these books is profoundly professional and scholarly. And I've never felt more seen or never felt that anybody ever understood what I was trying to do with my work than when I read how the jury described my work. It was incredible. And then I had the opportunity to do some traveling last year in 2023 and a little bit last year and speak in book festivals, literature festivals in Northern Europe about censorship quite a bit. And just like people were so stunned. It's like, what? And that was it kind of helped balance me. But to be, now we are a family in Alma. We're cousins, Jackie. I just want to make sure that y'all know that Jackie Woodson's in the house, right? And she won. What year did you win?
Oh my goodness.
I'm sorry, math. A little bit before I did, I think, a couple years.
Before the pandemic, it was 20. What year?
19? 18? Okay, there we go. And it's so all these laureate award winners and the organizations are just to be part of this family. It's like waking up one day and like somebody knocks on your door and says, "Hi, we really love you. Come here." And here's all your relatives. And have some fika. It's just, it'll be great. I'm still gobsmacked.
All right. Very good. Okay, so who's got a question? Yes.
So this isn't a question so much as it is a comment. My name is Angela. I'm a children's librarian at the Bronx, although I am Canadian-born and Southern-raised. This is a comment for you, Laurie. I tweeted you several years ago, and I was trying to find the screenshot of the tweet. But while I was in library school in Tampa Bay, Florida, of all places, I was volunteering in a very small, it was actually a converted storage closet, therapy library in a women's residential addiction treatment facility. And the young women in that facility came from all walks of life, really brought home to me that addiction can hit you no matter what your background is. They absolutely loved your stories. They always came in wanting to know if I had more of your books available to them. Your work really helped these women when they were in probably some of the toughest points in their lives. A lot of them were either with child or had given birth very shortly before entering the treatment facility. So again, I just want to take this opportunity to thank you for your work. I know how much it meant to all of those young women.
I appreciate that. Thank you. But I have to point out, if you think about a book, and you open it up, a hardcover book, think of the spine of the book is the story. And on one side is the writer trying to tell their story. And on the other side is not just the reader, but it's the librarian or the parent or the auntie or the person who gave that book to that reader. And we are all joined together, and we can't function without each other. So thank you.
Question? Or possibly a memory of reading Pippi when you were growing up? Yeah.
It's not a memory of Pippi, but it is a question. And maybe if I stutter because I'm still reeling from the shock of realizing that Jacqueline would sit there. But I'll get it. There's hope for you, Jacqueline. So one of my favorite things to ask authors is, what are your favorite books? Preferably children's, of course, but if you must go adult, we're happy to hear that too. And how do you, because we can only read so many books in 1 year, how do you think about what books you're going to read next and make those decisions?
So this morning, before I came, I had tickets to see the Anne Frank Secret Annex here. And when I was 8, my parents took us on a trip to Amsterdam, and I went and visited the Secret Annex, read the book. It changed my life, made me feel like I need to be a writer like Anne, and to have the audacity to know that my writing was important even as a child. And so I consider that book a book for all ages, but I still think of it as a children's book because I read it then, and Anne Frank was brutally murdered when she was a child. And just the hope and the vision, and then also that just deep birthright feeling she had of I matter, my story matters, is something that is just still lives within me. And so I went this morning before our event today and would say that that's my #1 best book for all ages, but I think of it as a book that I give to a lot of the young people in my life. And then Judy Blume, right? She just rocked my world. In Saudi Arabia, I had to hide the Judy. And I got to tell her this later on. I interviewed her, but reading about Judy Blume, because I was born partially blind, I'm monocular, I am neurodiverse. So what I loved about Judy Blume is she was writing about young girls with scoliosis during a time when people weren't talking about disability justice and other things. And I remember just being like, everybody wants me to feel a certain kind of way about my disability, and everyone else seems to have a problem with it. And I'm just thinking, it's just me. It gives me actually ways in which to shapeshift and be multidimensional. That is not typical. And I don't know why everyone else thinks it's a sad thing. But it was, so for me, I think of Judy Blume's Deanie as a top book for me, which was very banned. That book is banned for many reasons, but because it really made me see, oh, you can be a whole intact person who happens to be disabled. And that's just one of the facts about you. As a child, there are many other things that matter. And then I would say that there's so many other books that really have moved me. But I would say that Maya Angelou and her Basquiat book, The Life Doesn't Frighten Me at All, was a book that was given to me that I've probably read 800 times. And I've been reading it again in the context of our current reality. And to think about what it would be to be fearless and what it would mean to carry on that legacy that I think is a part of the African American narrative tradition. So those would be the top three. And then how do I decide what I read? So I read a lot. I love to read, and I read a lot on submission. But I also use my library card, my local library uptown, and I love books, and I ask for all the galleys. And I always just go to what my intuition wants. So if I see a theme, a value, a cover, an idea, something that just energetically tells me our souls need to meet, that's how I decide. And I've started to talk about this a little bit more because you were talking about the corporate publishing thing and how you do in submission. You know, I write my acquisition memos, but people also know I'm just that kind of person where I'm like, oh, is there the spiritual alchemy for the book that says that I'm its editor and that we can be in conversation? So I'm sort of like that about books too. That's why I work at Random House. I'm attracted to every book. It could be about physics or religion or a children's picture book, about anything. It's really about, is there something that sparks the energy of imagination and curiosity? And then does my intuition want to know more?
I've spent the last 5 years reading primary sources about the American Revolution, because I have a book coming out in a couple of weeks set in Boston in 1776, and the research has been so much fun. Oh my gosh. And useful, it turns out. I've learned a lot of lessons that I'll be using in the next few years. It's not the first time we've come up against tyrants in America. So learning quite a bit. And it's interesting because I've always been so petrified of reading someone who's writing for the same age group that I'm writing, and of unintentionally borrowing something, which is called stealing. That I don't really read that much in our field for fun, because I'm just like, and I have to be able to trust my imagination isn't shoplifted. So I read a lot of mysteries. I like a good, solid mystery with a strong sense of place, and I'm not a highbrow reader. Stories in the New Yorker, I don't get them. I never will. I'm old. I only have a certain number of books I can read before I die, and they're not going to be highbrow.
More questions?
I'm going to throw in a plug here for people to read more books from the lists of the books that are being banned. The toll on the authors, and the idea that there is no public demand or interest in reading their stories is incredibly difficult if you are particularly an emerging writer, or it was your first book that just got adopted in a bunch of schools and now suddenly you're whatever they're calling you. It means a lot when there is a public out there who still wants those books. And actually, I struggle to read still as an adult, but the joy has been starting to read kids' books because I can pick them up and they're fast and I put them down. And I've actually started to read all of these young adult authors. And of course, when I was a young adult, still am a little, those books didn't exist at all. And so it's been that way for me with graphic novels, which are incredible. The librarians know that. They don't need me to tell them, but everyone else doesn't know that. Yeah, I would just say, like, if you're not reading, anything by Kyle Lukoff, who writes about trans characters and families, the most incredible books, and he's a former librarian. No secret there. Maya Kobabe's Genderqueer, George M. Johnson, All Boys Aren't Blue. If you haven't read these books and you don't know why they're so banned, that's what I would say to focus your time and energy on, because then you will be all the more profoundly affected and understanding of why, how just atrocious the banning of these books is.
Question, Jonathan, so how do we keep up with the growing list of banned books?
Well, you can always learn about what's being banned at PEN America, at pen.org. I mean, we get sent, I wish it wasn't so depressing, but we get sent basically lists almost every single day of books that are being banned, and longer and longer lists. But now, in the 4th year of this, a number of newspapers around the country, and you should all support local news, are also now starting to do more investigative journalism. So the Tennessean, for anyone with Tennessee roots, has recently just published an accounting of all the books that have been banned in Tennessee, and it's astounding. The Des Moines Register, which recently has been under fire for publishing the results of a presidential poll, you may know, also happens to have done incredible research on the thousands of books that have been banned across Iowa as a result of a law there. And so you can come to pen.org, you can look at work that is done by the ALA and some of these other newspapers. And it's changing all the time.
Can I just add one thing to that? I hope you are all aware that the publishing community is pushing back. This was led by Penguin. I guess we're Penguin Random House now. We're Random Penguins now. And finally, the other publishers have come on board, and we have lawsuits against the state of Iowa and the state of Florida that are very slowly making their way through the system, and hopefully will make a difference.
Do you think Pippi might be banned?
Oh, that's a great question.
I haven't seen it yet. And I swim in a lot of these lists, so I haven't seen it directly.
That is a great question.
Well, so many of the books that are being banned are books by people of color and queer folks.
She's unlikely to be banned, although now there is a lot of banning. I mean, the banning just gets wider and wider, so like now it's like could be just women. There has also been an uptick in books. There's everything that there has been an uptick in new books about that didn't used to have books is being banned. Neurodivergent kids and families, LGBTQ families, intersex individuals, sexual abuse, and anything difficult or challenging in life that young people are obviously going to encounter in their lives being banned. So, but no question, the most fear right now and the most obvious targeting that is leading to banned books. I mean, a lot of the times the books are pulled not because somebody actually complained about them. This is also a big problem. It's because somebody might. If you go through a library shelf and you think, well, somebody might be offended by this, you're gonna pull out, not gonna be a lot of books left. The dictionary, that's gotta go, got a lot of bad words in it. They did ban the book dictionary in one Florida school district where our lawsuit with the publishers is. But it's very clear that they're targeting, it's been very clear for 4 years, stories with black protagonists, black authors, black history, black identities, of just all kinds, like even, I think there's one that's called, it's one about, it's about a girl and her hair. That's what it's about. It's Hair Love. Yeah, thank you. And books about LGBTQ families are very, very commonly targeted. There is a lawsuit that is now going to be taken up by the Supreme Court, which we're watching closely, and we should all stand on the side. If you want to know what books to buy the 9 books that are being targeted in that lawsuit, where 3 families decided that they believe it is their religious liberty not to have their children even have the possibility of knowing about or touching such books in schools, and so those are the 9 books they're targeted. It's a case from Montgomery County, Maryland.
So I wanted to say something about this too, because I have been banned multiple times and definitely feel it has something to do with my identity and point of view. because the subject matter has ranged. Usually if it's a reason, on the few occasions that there's been a reason, I've known why. So one of the books I have has been banned in Uganda because it is a gender expansive book that acknowledges gender expansiveness. But I have just found out that some of the books that I've had that are challenged just simply are because they uplift the history of Black people around the world and have had that experience, or because I have a book called This Book is Feminist. And there's some people who don't like that one either. And then, one of the ones that was challenged was also because it was a book, I love philosophy. And at one point I thought I might have wanted to do a PhD in philosophy. And I wanted to think about what were the big philosophical questions that children ask and give them ideas from a lot of different perspectives about what people think. And there were people who had a problem with the questions, what is God? And what is race? Which I was basically saying we were the human race, but here's how people made race a thing. But that's what really showed me. And there were some parents who I actually engaged, because I know we're not encouraged to do this, but this is just who I am. I'm like Pippi. I'm gonna be like, let's talk, you wanna fight? Let's have a conversation. So sometimes I would do that. And I had a mom just saying, I thought they were well-written and well-organized, but I don't want my children to know they have the option to not get married and not have kids. Because I had a kid ask that about me, and I said, no, I'm a permanent auntie. I've decided that that's the life I'd like to lead. And so that person just said, well, I found that too political for my children to be exposed to at 10. So I also think a lot of it can also be attached to the identity of the author, how a parent perceives an author as a role model for their children. And the last thing I want to say is I'm so glad you spoke Renee Watson's name today, because I'm a big admirer of her work. But she's going to be tomorrow at the Brooklyn Museum. I'm curating a panel on banned books with my good friend Amber Tamblyn, and we are going to be reading from our banned books. And I'm going to be reading from the Well-Read Black Girl Anthology by Laurie Adim, and I know that Jacqueline is a part of that community as well. And we're gonna have a lot of people from that community there, and we were just banned by the Department of Defense last week for a book about celebrating Black women in literature. So I'm just really glad we're having this conversation, because there are many of us who are there who just wrote stories about the book where we first saw ourselves in a book. It was really about, what was the first time you saw yourself represented? And we were talking about people who see themselves represented in Pippi because they have red hair or freckles, and they've banned this book because it's a book where some of us who are highly melanated found that it was the first time that we were represented. So I wanted to just share that we're gonna be gathering tomorrow, if you'd like to join us.
Where will you be and what time?
At Brooklyn Museum at noon, and then noon to 4, and then we're gonna have a DJ after until, so would love to see you. Exactly, until, but I was really moved by what you're all saying, because what has made the blow better is that we're in it together and we've got us, and we're gonna talk about what each other's work has meant to us to be able to stand together in these stories, and the love we've been receiving from people who are saying, oh, I love that book, who don't look like us. There are other people who are not well-read Black girls who like to read about well-read Black girls, who are also saying, oh, it helped me realize, I'm a well-read redhead, like Pippi. So I wanted to say that, but it comes back to the question you had about whether we think Pippi's going to be banned. I think it's possible, because Julianne Moore's book was just banned, and it has a redhead protagonist with freckles on her face. So, and it's about being different.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. Somebody's got something they want to say or ask about?
I wanted to share a fun thing. If
Sure.
you don't pacify, these postcards are around. You can get a free audiobook of Pippi Longstocking, newly recorded by Sutton Foster. So in case you didn't know, just be sure to pick one of these up, and you can have an audio added to your collection.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.